The galaxy is about to witness a power it never dared to imagine. The words echoed through the cold, sterile air of the command center, sending a palpable sense of anticipation through the room. The giant holographic map flickered with red lights marking the ongoing battlefronts, and a heavy silence settled over the commanders. For years, the galaxy had been locked in a relentless cycle of conflict, with vast armies clashing over resources, territory, and old grudges. The great powers of the galaxy believed they were unshakable, bound by the same old rules of warfare. But now, something was different. Humanity, once seen as weak and insignificant, was about to change the balance of power forever. For centuries, humans had been observers, watching as the more powerful factions ruled, knowing when to stay hidden and when to take a step forward. But in the shadows, they had been preparing. Unseen by the galaxy's great empires, they had built up their technologies, honed their strategies, and mastered the art of war in a way no one could have anticipated. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. Why had the Durnian fleet, known for its neutrality and avoidance of galactic conflict, chosen to act now? What had changed? The answers were simple yet terrifying. Humanity had spent decades studying their enemies, learning every weakness, every flaw, and every tactical error made by the empires around them. They had spent years in silence, building an arsenal of technologies and strategies that were far ahead of anything anyone could imagine. And now they were ready to unleash their full might. When the first human ships emerged, there was no overwhelming wave of destruction. Instead, they arrived with surgical precision, a small fleet consisting of fast frigates and stealth destroyers, cutting through the battlefield with terrifying grace. It wasn't size or strength that defined them, it was the strategic brilliance of their approach. Each movement was calculated, every strike executed with such precision that their enemies were torn apart before they even knew what was happening. Tehe Galaxy had always fought with brute force, but humanity was about to show them a different way to fight, and the consequences would be far-reaching. The command room buzzed with anxious energy as the Durnian fleet's progress continued to unfold on the holographic screens. The galaxy's top commanders watched in disbelief as the enemy forces were systematically dismantled, one sector at a time. The human fleet, still small in numbers, was proving to be a force unlike any they had faced before. The sheer precision of each strike, the way the ships moved with almost preternatural speed, was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was as if the humans weren't just fighting, they were rewriting the very rules of warfare. What is this madness? General Khan, an esteemed officer of the Shadra coalition, muttered to himself. How can they move so quickly, so strategically? He had led countless campaigns, but never had he seen an enemy operate with such precision. Every attack seemed to be one step ahead, anticipating their movements with eerie accuracy. The human fleet wasn't just winning, they were outmaneuvering and outthinking them at every turn. Across the room, Fleet Admiral Renner tried to make sense of what was unfolding. They're not here to fight, they're here to control. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but the weight of her words hung heavily in the air. Look at their tactics. They aren't just hitting us, they're dismantling everything we rely on. Communications, supply lines, strategic outposts. They're cutting us off piece by piece. Renner's thoughts were interrupted by a tactical officer's report. Admiral, we've lost contact with Delta Sector. The humans are in full control. No casualties on their side. The room fell silent as the magnitude of the report settled in. The silence was broken by the voice of Commander Rake, who had been watching the human ships closely. How are they doing this? He asked, unable to mask his growing frustration. They don't have the numbers. They shouldn't even be a threat. But the truth was undeniable. The The humans, with their smaller fleet and precise tactics, were now dictating the flow of the battle. They weren't fighting for victory. They were fighting for dominance. The galaxy was now forced to question everything it had known about war. Isn't it incredible how the Durnian fleet turned the tide of this war with just a handful of ships and unmatched strategy? If you're as amazed as we are, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an epic story like this one. Join us as we explore more incredible tales of strategy, power, and the unexpected. The battlefield had grown eerily quiet, the sudden stillness hanging like a heavy fog in the command room. The Durnian fleet's forces were in retreat, their once formidable battle lines crumbling under the unrelenting precision of humanity's tactics. The coalition commanders, once confident in their superiority, were now left in stunned silence, trying to grasp how their once unshakable dominance had been so effortlessly unraveled. "This can't be happening," Admiral Zorath muttered, his voice barely audible. "How can they do this? We should have crushed them by now." He looked at the holographic display, where the human fleet, smaller and seemingly outgunned, continued to dominate, moving as a singular, well-oiled machine. "We've never seen anything like this. This is different." General Toran, his brow furrowed in frustration, slammed his fist onto the console. "They don't even need to engage us head-on. They're not using brute force. They're dismantling our strategy, one step at a time." His words were filled with disbelief, as if the very concept of a battle fought with intelligence, not power, was foreign to him. Across the room, Captain Illyra, one of the younger commanders, stepped forward, her eyes glued to the hologram. "It's more than just strategy, it's foresight. They're anticipating our every move." She turned to her colleagues, her voice sharp. "The humans aren't reacting to us. They're controlling the battlefield. Every decision we make seems to be playing into their hands." General Toran looked at Illyra with skepticism. "Foresight? What are you suggesting? That they know exactly what we're going to do before we do it?" Illyra nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "Exactly. Every time we move, they counter it before we even realize what's happening. It's as if they've studied our tactics for years. They're not just predicting us, they're manipulating the flow of the battle." The silence that followed was thick with realization. The coalition had always prided itself on its military superiority, but now, faced with an enemy that had anticipated their every move, they found themselves on the defensive, with no clear way to regain control. The galaxy's rules of war had been rewritten, and the Durnian fleet was at the center of this new order. The silence in the command room was broken only by the faint hum of the tactical displays. Across the galaxy, the tide of war had shifted in a way no one could have predicted. The Durnian fleet, which had once been seen as nothing more than a nuisance, was now a growing force that threatened to engulf the traditional powers. The holographic projections on the walls showed the steady retreat of the coalition forces, their once imposing defenses now crumbling under the relentless pressure of human ingenuity. General Toran clenched his fists, his frustration mounting. "This is impossible," he growled. "We have the superior firepower. We have the experience. How are they doing this?" The question lingered in the air unanswered, as every tactic he had ever relied on seemed to fail in the face of humanity's precision. "Perhaps it's time we stop asking how and start asking why," Captain Illyra said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Why are they playing with us like this? Why are they allowing us to retreat? It's not just about victory. They're sending us a message." Admiral Zorath, who had been silent for most of the meeting, finally spoke. "What kind of message? If they wanted to destroy us, they would have done so by now. But they aren't just killing us, they're breaking our spirit. They want us to understand that we're obsolete, His words hung heavily in the room, and a grim realization settled over the commanders. "They've learned everything about us," General Toran muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Every weakness, every flaw in our tactics. They've been studying us for years." "Exactly," Illyra replied. "This war isn't about numbers, it's about precision. About anticipating what we'll do next, and making sure we never have the chance to act." She looked at the map, where the human fleet continued to advance, not in overwhelming numbers, but with terrifying accuracy. "They're not just fighting, and they're making sure we understand the new rules of war." The commanders were left to grapple with this truth. Humanity wasn't just challenging their authority, they were rewriting the very essence of war, forcing the galaxy to rethink everything it thought it knew about conflict. The outcome of this battle was no longer about who had the most firepower. It was about who could outthink the other. The tension in the command room was unbearable as the battle raged on. The Durnian fleet's forces were now not just pushing their enemies back, they were setting the stage for something far more significant. As the holographic map shifted, more red sectors disappeared, marking the fall of critical strongholds in the coalition's defense network. There was no grand victory to celebrate, only the chilling precision of an opponent who was playing a game none of them understood. General Toran paced nervously, his eyes fixed on the rapidly advancing human fleet. "This is madness," he muttered. "They've taken Delta Sector, Gamma Sector. We've lost entire lines of defense, and they haven't lost a single ship. How is that even possible?" Admiral Zorath stood motionless, watching the map update with each new loss. "They're not just fighting to win, they're fighting to break us. Each victory is a calculated strike, a warning to the rest of us." His voice was cold, stripped of its previous confidence. "This isn't war as we've known it. It's something else." Captain Illyra glanced at the display. "It's an execution. Every movement they make is precise, surgical. They don't waste resources or time. Every ship they lose, they already know how to compensate." Her voice was sharp, tinged with both awe and frustration. "It's like they've anticipated every possible outcome. But what is their end game?" General Toran asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Why don't they just destroy us? Why leave us with this sense of impending doom?" Admiral Zorath narrowed his eyes, staring at the movements of the human fleet. "It's not about destruction. They want control. They've been stripping us of every advantage, one system at a time. They're forcing us into a corner where we'll have no choice but to surrender." Captain Illyra clenched her fists. "They're playing a long game. They've already broken our confidence, shattered our strategies, and now they'll move in for the final blow." The room was silent, each commander lost in their thoughts. The implications of the situation were clear. Humanity wasn't just changing the rules of war, they were rewriting them. And if they continued at this pace, the coalition wouldn't just lose a battle. They would lose the war itself without even realizing how it had happened. The atmosphere in the command center had shifted from disbelief to a growing sense of dread. The once proud coalition forces were now scattered, their strategic defenses collapsing like a house of cards under the relentless assault of the Durnian fleet. The holographic map now displayed a bleak picture. Every major sector was falling, one after another, without the coalition forces able to mount a significant defense. The human fleet, with its small yet precise force, had moved into the final stages of their offensive, and the galaxy was starting to realize that this was no ordinary war. It was an execution. "What's their next move?" General Toran asked, his voice devoid of the confident authority it once held. He was struggling to comprehend how everything had unraveled so quickly. "We've lost entire fleets, and they haven't even broken a sweat." Admiral Zorath studied the map in silence, his eyes narrowing as he traced the movements of the human ships. "They're isolating us. They've already crippled our supply lines, neutralized our reinforcements, and now they're cutting off every possible escape route." He paused for a moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "They're not just defeating us, they're ensuring we can't recover." Captain Elira, standing by the tactical display, clenched her jaw. "They're making sure there's no possibility of a counterattack, no hope of rebuilding." Her voice was steady but tinged with disbelief. "It's as if they knew exactly how we would respond to every move, and they planned for it all." General Toran's face twisted in frustration. "We're done. It's over." "Not yet," Admiral Zorath said, his voice firm. "They're taking their time. I think they want us to understand just how completely we've been outclassed." As the final stages of the battle drew nearer, the realization began to dawn. Humanity wasn't just conquering, they were crafting a new order. Every move had been calculated, every outcome anticipated, leaving their enemies with no chance to adapt. The coalition had been outwitted, outmaneuvered, and left with nothing but the harsh truth that their strategies, their tactics, and their way of thinking were no longer relevant in the new galaxy humanity was creating. The Durnian fleet wasn't just a military force, it was a blueprint for a new kind of war. A war where intelligence and foresight were the true weapons, and brute force had no place. The galaxy was about to face a terrifying new reality. Indeed, this new age, the most powerful force was no longer the biggest fleet or the strongest weapons. It was the mind. The human fleet continued its methodical advance, now within striking distance of the coalition's last stronghold. The once proud fleet of the coalition was in tatters, retreating to their most fortified position, hoping that the final bastion would hold. But even as the last defenders prepared for what they thought would be their final stand, a chilling realization settled in. Their defenses were nothing more than a temporary obstacle. The Durnian fleet wasn't interested in an all-out battle. They had already won, and the final steps were simply a formality. General Toran stood at the command console, his hands trembling as he watched the human ships move with terrifying precision. "They've outplayed us at every turn," he whispered, as if the words themselves were too painful to say aloud. "Every time we thought we had a chance, they've anticipated it. Every retreat, every maneuver, it's all been calculated." Admiral Zorath's gaze remained fixed on the holographic display, his eyes narrowing. "They're closing in, and they're not going to let us go," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "This isn't just about winning. It's about leaving us with no options, no escape. They're taking away everything we thought we could rely on." The tactical officer spoke up, his voice filled with disbelief. "Admiral, they've transmitted the terms of surrender." The room fell silent as the implications of this simple statement began to sink in. The humans were offering surrender, no conditions, no demands, just a stark, undeniable choice: capitulate or face total destruction. "They're playing us," Captain Elira said, her voice trembling. "They've broken us mentally. We've been forced into a corner, and now they're making us admit defeat. They want us to understand that we have no power left." The decision was now in the hands of the coalition forces. Their fleet, their empire, and their way of life had been reduced to this moment. There was no fighting back, no last-minute rally. The only question left was whether they would accept the inevitable. A cold silence filled the room as the human fleet's final message blazed across the screens. It wasn't a warning, nor a threat. It was simply a statement of fact. Humanity had conquered the galaxy through sheer intellect and strategy, and the old ways of war were now obsolete. "Do you accept our terms?" the message asked. There was no anger, no malice, only the chilling certainty that the galaxy was never going to be the same. The silence in the command room was deafening. As the terms of surrender flashed across the screens, the weight of the moment pressed down on every officer present. It had taken mere hours for humanity to reshape the galaxy's power structure, and now the final decision was upon them. The coalition forces, battered and broken, stood at a crossroads. No more battles, no more reinforcements. The human fleet, small yet impossibly efficient, had obliterated every possible escape route, every last defense. The galaxy had been irrevocably changed. General Toran looked around the room, his mind racing. "We've lost everything," he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and resignation. "Our fleets, our territories, our control, gone." His hands rested on the console, as if hoping for some last-ditch salvation, but there was none. The reality was undeniable. Admiral Zorath nodded solemnly, his eyes scanning the battle reports that had come in. "We don't have any options left. We either surrender or face total annihilation." His voice lacked the fire it once carried. Now there was nothing but a cold acceptance of the inevitable. "But it's not just about us anymore, is it? Humanity hasn't just beaten us. They've shown the galaxy a new way of fighting, a new way of thinking." Captain Elira looked at the holographic display, where the final remnants of the coalition fleet were scattered, hopelessly outmaneuvered by the human forces. "We were never their true target," she said quietly. "They've set a precedent, not just for us, but for everyone in the galaxy. No one will ever challenge them again, not with this kind of strategy." The decision was made in silence. The terms of surrender were accepted, and the galaxy took a collective breath. It was over, but it was only the beginning of a new era. Humanity had not simply won, they had redefined the very nature of war. What had once been considered impossible, an intellectual strategic victory over might, had now become the standard. The old empires, once supreme, were now relics of a bygone era. As the surrender was officially transmitted, the remaining coalition forces slowly powered down their systems, their flags lowered for the final time. The galaxy, watching from every corner of space, realized that the true power no longer lay in the strength of armies, but in the ability to think, adapt, and anticipate. Humanity had shown that victory wasn't about who fought hardest, but who fought smartest. And so, the galaxy entered a new chapter, one where intelligence, not force, would define the future. The age of brute war was over. The era of human strategy had begun. As we've seen, humanity's rise to power wasn't just a victory. In battle, it was the dawn of a new era, a new way of thinking. Now the galaxy will never be the same again. If you want to stay at the edge of your seat and dive deeper into stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Because remember, victory doesn't belong to the strongest, but to the smartest. And you'll want to be here when the next game-changing moment unfolds.